The fire had already consumed half the abandoned prospector's shack when the spring floods came to Arizona territory without a whisper of warning. Toby Brennan was measuring boundary stones along the Rio Seco when he heard the roar upstream, a sound like God's own anger rolling down the arroyo. Then he heard the screaming, two voices, high and terrified, coming from the wash below. He turned and saw them, two Apache girls, maybe 9 and 11 years old, swept off their feet by a wall of brown water 6 feet high. The current caught them like rag dolls. Toby's hands moved before his mind could. He grabbed the 66-foot surveying chain from his tool bag, wrapped one end twice around the cottonwood trunk, and waded into chest-deep water that tried to tear his legs out from under him. He caught the younger girl by the arm, threw the chain into the older one. She grabbed it with both hands. They pulled themselves to the bank just as a cottonwood log slammed past where they'd been. All three collapsed in the mud, gasping and coughing. The cold iron links of the chain lay between them, dripping. The girls looked at him with terror in their eyes. Not gratitude, just fear. Then they bolted into the sagebrush and vanished like smoke. Toby sat there alone, his lungs burning, staring at the coiled chain at his feet. He didn't know those two girls would cost him everything he'd worked for. Toby rode back to his camp as the storm clouds broke apart and scattered. His shirt was still damp, clinging cold to his ribs. His palms were raw where the iron chain links had cut in. He'd been measuring boundaries for 5 years on this stretch of land, building fences acre by acre, and he'd never seen water come down that fast. He stripped off the wet shirt and hung it on a juniper branch. The evening air was already pulling the moisture away, leaving salt lines in the fabric. He built a small fire and put coffee on, then sat with his back against a rock and stared at the survey chain. The links gleamed dull in the firelight. 66 feet, 100 links, standard Gunter's measure. Every surveyor in the territory carried one. His had just saved 2 lives. He kept seeing those girls' faces. The terror when they looked at him wasn't just about the water. It was older than that, deeper. They'd run from him like he was the danger. Maybe he was. White men hadn't been kind to Apache families in these parts. Toby had heard the stories, the ones folks told in town when they'd had enough whiskey to forget shame. He poured coffee and tried not to think about it. He had his own problems to reckon with. The cattle contract was due in 30 days. 200 head needed water access, and the only creek worth a dam ran through the north section, land he didn't own. His boss had been clear: secure water rights or lose the contract. $1,500? 18 months' wages. Without it, 5 years of fence building would amount to nothing but sore hands in a lonely camp. The loneliness was the part that snuck up on him. He'd built this ranch for a family he didn't have. One fence post at a time. Good fences make good neighbors, the saying went. But when you were the only one on your side, all you had was more fence. He finished his coffee and kicked dirt over the fire. Tomorrow he'd finish the boundary measurements, mark the corners, file the paperwork, maybe ride into Tucson and talk to the land office about options for water access, legal options, fair options. He stretched out on his bedroll under stars that seemed too bright after the storm. Somewhere out there, those 2 girls were probably telling their mother about the white man with the chain who'd pulled them from the flood. He wondered if they'd mentioned he'd tried to help, or just that he'd been there. Morning came with the smell of wet sage and the sound of a canyon wren testing its voice. Toby was back at the boundary line by dawn, the survey chain coiled over his shoulder. The storm had washed the arroyo clean, leaving fresh sand and the twisted shapes of debris caught in the brush. He found their tracks near the boundary marker, small footprints, barefoot, leading north toward the higher ground. They'd been gathering something before the flood hit. Wildflowers maybe, or herbs. Apache families used this land for gathering, had for generations. The boundary stones didn't mean much to them, just white man's lines on white man's paper. Toby set up his tripod and compass, checking the section corners against his notes. Everything matched. The northeast quarter of Section 14, running up against territorial land. Good grazing, better water. He heard horses before he saw them, 3 riders coming from the north, moving slow and careful. He straightened, hand drifting toward the rifle leaning against the tripod. Old habit from his army days. Then he saw the girls. They were riding double on a paint mare, and beside them on a black horse was a woman who made Toby forget his name for a second. Apache, probably in her 30s, with the kind of bearing that said she was used to respect. Her dress was traditional, beautifully made, with intricate beadwork that caught the morning light. But it was her face that held him, high cheekbones, dark eyes that looked straight through him, and an expression that held both pride and something that might have been gratitude. The 3 of them rode right up to where he stood. The woman dismounted with easy grace. The girls stayed on their horse, watching him now with curiosity instead of fear. "You are the one who saved my daughters," she said. Her English was clear, accented, but precise. "I am called Nalin." Toby pulled off his hat. "Ma'am, I did what anyone would have done." No." She stepped closer, and he could see tears in her eyes that she was fighting to hold back. Most would have ridden past. Some would have heard children screaming and still ridden past because they were Apache children. She looked at him like she was measuring something deeper than height or age. "These are my daughters," she continued. "Ayita and Kaya. They are everything to me. Yesterday they went to pick herbs and took shelter when the storm came. They fell asleep. The lightning started a fire in the old prospector's shack. Then the flood." Her voice caught. "They would have died if not for you." Toby shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gratitude. "Are they all right? They weren't burned?" "Smoke in their lungs, fear in their hearts, but otherwise unharmed because of you." She took a deep breath, gathering herself for something. Toby could see her straighten, her hands smoothing her dress like she was preparing for ceremony. "I am a widow," Nalin said. "My husband Pedro was killed 2 years ago. Since then I have raised my daughters alone. It is hard. Apache women without husbands are vulnerable, especially with children." She reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a folded paper, old, carefully kept, the creases worn soft. "I wish to sell you my land. 160 acres. Good grazing. Creek access." She met his eyes. $200. A fair price for a quick sale. Toby stared at the deed in her hands. Creek access. Exactly what he needed. The price was right. More than right. It was perfect. Too perfect. A man doesn't get what he needs handed to him without a catch. Toby invited her to his camp. They sat by the remains of his morning fire, while he added wood and got the coffee going again. The girls stayed back, watching from their horse. Not fleeing this time, but not trusting either. "Why sell?" Toby asked. He kept his voice gentle. "If your husband filed the claim, you've got rights to keep it." Nalen's hands wrapped around the tin cup he'd given her. Her fingers were calloused, working hands. "Too hard alone. My brother in Mexico wants us to come home. He says we will be safer there." "And you? What do you want?" She looked toward her daughters. "I want them to grow up without fear, without being called—" She stopped, shook her head. "It does not matter. This land was Pedro's dream, but Pedro is gone." Toby took the deed carefully, unfolding it in his lap. The paper was thin, worn soft at the creases like she'd looked at it many times. The ink was faded, but legible. Pedro Azul, filed April 1871, Northeast Quarter, Section 14, Township 12 South. Range 16 East. 160 acres surveyed and confirmed. His surveyor's eye traced the description. It matched the land he'd just been measuring. The creek ran right through it. Perfect water access for his cattle. "This is exactly what I need," he said slowly. "But I need to review it proper. At the land office in Tucson, make sure the transfer's legal." "Of course." Nilly nodded. "I understand white man's law requires many papers." "It's not about white man's law. It's about making sure you get a fair deal." He handed the deed back. $200 is generous, but I want to be certain you know what you're selling." Something shifted in her face. Surprise. Maybe respect. Most men would not care. "Well," Toby stood, brushing dust from his pants. "I reckon most men aren't as particular as I am about doing things square." They agreed to meet at the Tucson land office the next morning. Nalin and her daughters rode north, back toward wherever they'd made camp. Toby watched them go, the deed's description still running through his mind. 160 acres, creek access, $200. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. Something about this felt like standing on a roof in high wind. Like any second the whole thing could shift under his feet. The Tucson Territorial Land Office sat on a corner lot, a squat adobe building with a faded wooden sign. Inside, it smelled of ink and old paper, and the particular staleness of a place where the windows never opened. Silas Wardlow sat behind a scarred oak desk, surrounded by walls of ledgers and document cabinets. He was a thin man, maybe 38, with nervous energy in his hands that made him seem like he was always reaching for something. When Toby and Nalin walked in, Wardlow's eyes went to her face and something flickered there. Recognition, maybe concern. "Help you folks?" His voice was clipped, official. "Need to review a deed transfer," Toby said. "Mrs. Azul here is selling me her late husband's claim." "Ah." Wardlow held out his hand. Let me see the deed. Nolan passed it across the desk. Wardlow examined it, his ink-stained fingers leaving smudges on the edges. The sound of his breathing seemed too loud in the quiet office. Pedro Azul, Wardlow said. Yes, I remember this filing. Unfortunate about his passing. Can we proceed with the transfer? Toby asked. Of course, of course. Wardlow pulled a fresh form from a drawer. There'll be a filing fee, $50 for the transfer paperwork. Toby felt his spine straighten. 50? I thought the standard fee was 15. Special circumstances. Wardlow didn't look up from his writing. Cross-cultural transfer, extra paperwork, verification of... What verification? Well, Wardlow set down his pen. We have to ensure the widow has legal standing, that the marriage was recognized under territorial law, that... The deed's already filed, Toby interrupted. It's been filed for 5 years. What's to verify? Wardlow's fingers drummed on the desk. Mr. Brennan, these are standard procedures. Let me see the survey plat. Silence. Wardlow's drumming stopped. I'm sorry? The survey plat, Toby repeated. The official map showing the boundaries. I want to compare it to the deed description. That's not necessary for a simple transfer. Humor me. Toby kept his voice level. I'm a surveyor by trade. Like to see what I'm buying. Wardlow stood, walked to the wall cabinet with slow, reluctant steps. He rifled through files, pulled out a rolled document, brought it back to the desk. He unrolled it with those ink-stained fingers, weighted the corners with ledgers. Toby leaned over the plat, studying the lines. His eyes traced the section boundaries, the acreage calculations in the corner. Section 14, NE quarter, 120 acres. His gut went cold. This says 120 acres, he said quietly. That's correct. The deed says 160. The plat is the official record, Mr. Brennan. Toby pulled the deed from his pocket, laid it beside the plat. The deed says, Northeast quarter, section 14, a quarter section is 160 acres. That's standard, that's how the land office surveys. Sometimes adjustments are made. Which one's wrong? Toby looked up at Wardlow. The deed or the plat? Wardlow's face had gone tight. The plat is what's filed. That's what matters legally. Nolan was watching them both, confusion in her eyes. The English was moving too fast, too technical. I want to see the original survey notes, Toby said. Those aren't public record. You'd need a judge's order. Toby noticed things then. The way Wardlow's fingers trembled slightly, the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool office. The stack of ledgers behind him, some with names visible on the spines, Mexican names, Apache names. We'll come back tomorrow, Toby said. He took the deed, folded it carefully, handed it back to Nolan. Outside, the April sun was bright enough to hurt. Nolan touched his arm. What is wrong? Toby looked back at the land office, at the dusty window with its faded sign. I'm not sure yet, but something's not right with those numbers. The white man's office made the papers, Nolan said. The seal is there. Why would they lie? That was the question, wasn't it? Wardlow's ink-stained fingers trembled as he closed the ledger. And Toby realized this wasn't the first time. Toby rode north to Nalen's land the next morning. He needed to see it with his own eyes, measure it with his own chain, trust but verify. That's what his old survey captain used to say. The land was good, rolling terrain with decent grass, a line of cottonwoods marking where the creek cut through. He could see why Pedro Azul had filed for it. A man could run 50 head here easy, maybe more in a wet year. He set up his tripod at the section corner and started measuring. The chain made its familiar sound as he stretched it out. Clink, 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 the links settling into place. 66 feet at a time, he worked his way along what should have been the north boundary according to the deed description. The boundary stones were there, new-looking stakes driven in beside them, the kind the land office used for official markings. But when Toby's chain reached them, the math was wrong. He measured again, then a third time, because a man doesn't accuse anyone of anything on one measurement. The stones were exactly 40 chains short, 2,640 feet, 40 acres missing from the north end. Toby knelt by one of the stones, ran his fingers over it. The earth around the base was loose, darker than the surrounding soil, fresh. He dug down a few inches with his knife and found it. Clean-cut marks where someone had pried it up, moved it, reset it. 6 months old, maybe less. Someone had physically moved the boundary markers to match that fraudulent plat. He sat back on his heels, staring at the stone. The smell of disturbed earth was sharp in his nose, mixing with the alkali dust that coated everything out here. This wasn't a paperwork mistake. This was systematic theft. His boss was waiting at camp when Toby rode back. Harlan Webb sat his horse like a man who'd counted every dollar and found most of them wanting. "Brennan, where are we on the water rights?" "There's a problem with the land office records," Toby said, dismounting. His hands still smelled like dirt from digging around those stones. "That's not my problem. The cattle contract needs water access confirmed in 30 days, or the deal's off." "And if the land's been stolen?" Webb's face went hard. "Then you buy it cheap and count yourself lucky. You think those Apache families got their claims honest? Everything out here is built on someone else's dirt. That's not how I do business." "Then you won't be doing business much longer." Webb turned his horse. 30 days, Brennan. Get it done, or you're out." The sound of hoofbeats faded. Toby stood there with the survey chain heavy on his shoulder, doing math he didn't want to do. $200 for 160 acres. 40 of them stolen. His job on the line, his contract, 5 years of work. He remembered his army days, drawing lines on maps that moved families from their land to reservations. Legal lines, official surveys. He'd told himself then that he was just doing his job, following orders. He'd hated himself for it every day since. Couldn't be part of that machinery again, not even to save his own skin. The back room of the Lucky Dollar Saloon smelled like pipe smoke and old leather. Judge Artemis Cole had turned it into makeshift chambers. The territory didn't provide courtrooms in every town, so judges made do. Law books were stacked on a table beside a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Cole was 67, with a white beard and eyes that had seen enough of frontier justice to know the difference between law and right. He listened while Toby explained about the deed, the plat, the moved boundary stones. "Why do you care?" Cole asked when Toby finished. He tamped his pipe, the sound of it like small thunder. "You could buy that land cheap, get your water access, move on." "Because I was an army surveyor once," Toby said. "I know how this works, and I didn't much like what I saw." Cole studied him over the pipe. "No, I don't imagine you did." He stood, pulled down ledgers from a shelf. These were old territorial records, going back to statehood organization. His fingers, gnarled with age but steady, paged through entries. Pedro Azul, filed April 1871, surveyed by territorial surveyor James McKendrick. 160 acres confirmed and registered. Cole kept reading. Current plat shows. Revision dated March 1874, signed by Silas Wardlow. "After Pedro died," Toby said. "After Pedro died," Cole confirmed. Convenient timing. He pulled more ledgers. Each one made a soft thump on the table. The dust they raised caught the lamplight. "Here's another. Maria Gonzalez lost 30 acres in a revision. Juan Reyes lost 50. All revised by Wardlow, all after the original claimant died or moved away." Cole looked up. 12 cases, all Apache or Mexican families. All lost acreage that somehow ended up sold to speculators. "That's systematic fraud." "That's what it looks like to me, too." Cole set the ledgers aside. "But looking like fraud and proving it are different things. I'd need public testimony, witness measurements, something a jury can see with their own eyes." "I can remeasure," Toby said. "I've got the chain. I know the original survey. Markers? You'll need the widow's consent and community witnesses, at least a dozen, men whose word will hold in territorial court." Cole pulled open a drawer, produced a leather case. Inside was a brand iron, the kind used for marking cattle. "This was Pedro Azul's," Cole said. "Held in estate records. It proves he ran cattle on that land, gives his widow legal standing." He handed it to Toby. The iron was cold, heavy, the brand mark worn smooth from use. "You do this," Cole continued, "and you'll lose that contract. Your boss won't wait for justice to play out." Toby turned the brand iron in his hands. He could smell the old smoke still caught in the metal, feel the weight of it. "Reckon he won't," Toby said. Cole poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across. "Then you'll need to decide if doing right is worth the cost." The judge leaned back, and his chair creaked under his weight. "If you're right about this, it's not just one widow we're talking about. It's dozens. But proof requires witnesses, men willing to stand in daylight and say what they saw." And Toby realized, finding the truth was the easy part. Getting people to testify to it, that was where the real fight would be. Toby found Nalen's camp near the creek the next afternoon. She'd set up a simple shelter, canvas stretched between cottonwood trees, a fire circle lined with stones. The smell of cooking cornmeal mixed with sage smoke. The girls were playing some kind of string game in the shade. Nalen looked up when he rode in. Her face was guarded. "I need to show you something," Toby said. He dismounted, brought out both documents, her deed and the copy of the plat he'd sketched from memory. They sat by the fire. The warmth felt good even in the April heat. Toby laid the papers side by side. "Your deed says 160 acres. Oin. The land office plat shows 120. Nalen studied both papers like they were written in stars. "Which is true?" "The deed is true. The plat is a lie." "But the office made the plat." She touched the paper, tracing the official seal. "It has the mark. Why would they lie?" "Because the clerk changed it after Pedro died. He moved the boundary markers to match the false plat, then sold the extra 40 acres to speculators." Nalen's brow furrowed. "I do not understand. How can he sell what is mine?" "He can't. That's why it's fraud." Toby tried to keep his voice patient. "He steals on paper first, then moves the markers so it looks legal. But markers move, wind, animals. These were dug up and replanted. I saw the tool marks." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire. The wood crackled and popped. "How much did he steal?" Toby did the math. 40 acres at $5 an acre. About $200. "That is what I am selling the land for." No, you're selling 160 for 200. He already stole 40 more. You'd be losing both ways." Understanding dawned slowly in her face, like sunrise over the mesa, then suspicion. "How do I know you are telling the truth? Maybe you want the land for less money." "If I wanted it cheap, I'd have bought it yesterday and kept my mouth shut." She looked at him hard. "What do I do?" "Let the judge order a public resurvey. We measure the land with witnesses, prove the fraud. And if you are wrong, if the office is right, then I'm wrong, you sell the land, I apologize. And if you are right, then you keep what's yours." Nalene stared at the two pieces of paper, then at her daughters playing in the shade. "Pedro always said these 160 acres would care for us." The way she said it made Toby think there was something more to that statement. But before he could ask, they heard horses approaching. The man who rode into camp had Pedro's eyes, but harder. He dismounted like he owned the ground he stood on, all coiled anger and travel dust. "Nalen." He spoke in Spanish at first, fast and sharp, then switched to English when he saw Toby. "Why is this white man telling you not to sell?" "Miguel." Nalen stood. "He says I am being cheated." "Of course he does." Miguel spat in the dust near Toby's boots. "White man's tricks. Take the $200 and come home to Sonora. This land will only bring you trouble." "She's owed more than 200, Toby said evenly. Miguel laughed, a harsh sound. "And how much more? What makes you the expert?" "At least the full value of 160 acres. Probably more." "More?" Miguel's eyes narrowed. "How much more?" "At fair price, maybe 400, maybe 5. "And when has white law given us fair price?" Miguel turned to Nalene, speaking rapid Spanish. Toby caught enough to understand arguments about safety, about promises broken, about the futility of fighting the system. Toby waited until Miguel paused for breath. "This time is different. There's a judge who will help. We can prove—" "Prove?" Miguel wheeled on him. "I've seen too many promises broken to believe in proof. What do you want from this, really? What does your judge want?" "I want her to keep what's hers. Nobody gives us what's ours. We take what we can and survive." Miguel's face was flushed now, years of anger spilling out. "The railroad is coming through Section 14. You know what that means?" Toby went very still. "Easement payment," Miguel continued. $2,000 for the right to lay track across the property, but only if the deed is clear. Only if what? He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. $2,000? Toby's voice was quiet. "You knew about this?" "Everyone knows the railroad is coming, but the railroad won't pay an Apache widow. They'll pay the land office, and the land office will find a way to keep it." Miguel's voice was bitter. "Better she takes 200 now than fights for nothing." "That's her $2,000. "That's a dream." Miguel pointed at Nalene. "This is survival. She has daughters to feed. You want her to risk everything on your promise that the law will work? When has it ever worked for us? Hoofbeats interrupted them. Toby turned to see Harland Webb riding in, his face set like stone. Brennan, Webb didn't dismount. You're done. Contracts is canceled. I've got 2 weeks. You've got nothing. Found another foreman with water rights already secured. Webb's horse stamped, smelling the tension. Clear out your camp by Sunday. He turned his horse and left without another word. The sound of hooves faded into the afternoon heat. Toby stood there, feeling the ground shift under him. No job, no contract, no leverage. $1,500 gone. 5 years of work for nothing. Miguel looked at Nalin. See? He's lost everything trying to help you. You'll lose too. That's how it works. Nalin's eyes were on Toby's face. Why would you do this? Toby's throat was tight. He thought about the answer, about all the complicated reasons that boiled down to one simple thing. Because it's right. Miguel mounted his horse. Right doesn't feed children. Come home, Nalin, before you end up with nothing. The sun was starting its descent toward the western mesa. In the distance, Toby heard it. A train whistle, faint but clear. The railroad coming, bringing $2,000 that Nalin would never see unless someone fought for her, and Toby realized everyone wanted her to lose. Miguel wanted her gone. Wardlow wanted her cheated. Webb wanted his water. The speculators wanted her land. Everyone except the one man who'd just lost everything for trying to help. Evening came to the camp, the kind of soft desert twilight that made the world seem almost forgiving. Miguel had ridden south an hour ago, still angry, still convinced Nalin was making a mistake. The girls had gone quiet, sensing the weight of adult decisions pressing down. Toby was preparing to leave when Nalin spoke. I will wait for the judge's resurvey. He turned. She stood by the fire, her hands clasped in front of her like she was holding something fragile. Your brother's not wrong about the risk, Toby said. He is wrong about you. I've got no job now. Can't help much going forward. Nalin stepped closer. The firelight caught her face, showed him the determination there. You have already helped more than anyone. More than my own blood. She reached into her dress, pulled out the leather pouch that held the $200 she'd been planning to use for the journey to Sonora. Take this. You need it now. No. You lost your work because of me. I lost my work because I chose to. Toby held up his hand. This isn't for money, Mrs. Azul. Then why? The question hung in the cooling air. Somewhere a coyote called, testing the night. I was a surveyor for the army, Toby said finally. After the war, drew lines on maps that moved people off their land onto reservations. Legal lines, official surveys. The words tasted bitter. Told myself I was just doing my job, following orders. And now? Now I know those lines I drew put families on ground that couldn't feed them, put children in places where they died of hunger or disease or just plain heartbreak. He met her eyes. I can't undo what I did then, but I can stop it happening here. You think one widow changes anything? I think 12 families deserve their land back. Judge Cole found 12 cases, all like yours, all cheated by Wardlow. Toby picked up a stick, drew in the dirt by the firelight. You're not alone in this. Something shifted in Nalin's face. The realization that this was bigger than her daughters, bigger even than the $2,000 she didn't know was coming. What happens now? Judge authorizes a public resurvey. I measure the land with witnesses watching, prove the markers were moved. Toby tossed the stick into the fire. Takes maybe 30 days to organize. Get the right people there. 30 days I cannot feed my daughters? I'll work odd jobs, blacksmithing, fence repair, won't pay much, but I'll manage. He looked at her straight. Question is, can you wait? Can you trust that the law will work this once? Nalin was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. The smell of sage smoke drifted on the evening breeze. Pedro believed in American law, she said softly. He said that is why he filed the claim properly, with all the papers, all the fees paid. He believed if you did things correctly, the law would protect you. She looked at Toby. He died believing that. I would like to know if he was right. Then we'll find out together. A sound from the shadows, the girls approaching. Aita came first, shy, holding something behind her back. Kaya followed, braver, her chin up. Kind man, Kaya said in careful English. The words were new in her mouth, formal. Thank you. Aita brought her hand forward. She held a small bundle of wildflowers, desert marigolds, bright yellow against the darkening sky. She offered them to Toby like a treaty. He took them, his throat suddenly tight. These are real pretty. Thank you. The girls smiled and ran back to their shelter. Nayland watched them go, something like hope in her face. They are learning that some white men keep promises, she said. That is worth more than $200. Tucson was hostile the next morning. Toby felt it the moment he rode in, the stares, the whispers that stopped when he passed. Small towns had one talent, and that was spreading news faster than telegraph wire. The general store was cool inside, smelling of flour and lamp oil and new rope. The owner, a thick man named Garrett, was at the counter. Heard you lost your contract, Garrett said. No greeting, just straight to business. Heard right. Over an Apache woman's land claim? Over what's right. Toby set a few coins on the counter. Need coffee and beans. A voice from behind him, one of the townsmen who spent more time talking than working. That woman should have left with her brother, would have saved everyone trouble. Toby turned slow. Everyone? Or just the folks trying to cheat her? Now listen here. No, you listen. Toby kept his voice level. That woman's got a legal claim, properly filed, properly surveyed. Someone at the land office altered the records to steal from her. You want to stand with thieves, that's your choice. The townsman's face went red, but an older Mexican voice cut in before he could respond. The boy's right. Jose Martinez stood in the doorway. He was maybe 55, gray in his beard, with a blacksmith's shoulders and hands scarred by years of hammer work. He walked to the counter with the confidence of a man who'd earned his place. My father filed a claim in 1868, Jose said to the room. Lost 80 acres to a revised survey. We were told it was a mistake in the original paperwork, told to accept it or lose everything. He looked at Toby. I heard what you're doing. Just trying to help. I'll witness your survey, Jose said. My father lost land the same way. Time someone stood up to it. Garrett shifted behind the counter. Jose, that could cost you business. Folks might not. Some things matter more than business. Jose met Toby's eyes. When do you need witnesses? Soon as Judge Cole sets the date. Need at least a dozen men whose word will hold in court. I know 3 retired surveyors who'll come, and I know the families who lost land. Jose counted on his fingers. I can get you 15 witnesses, 20 if you need them. Toby felt something loosen in his chest. That'd do fine. They left the store together. Outside, the April sun was bright, making them squint. Jose led him to the blacksmith shop 3 buildings down, a low adobe structure with the forge glowing inside, the smell of coal smoke and hot metal thick in the air. You need work, Jose said. It wasn't a question. I need help. Can you swing a hammer? Well enough. Good. Pays not much, but it'll keep you fed. They shook hands. Jose's grip was iron, his palm rough as leather. Why help me? Toby asked. You don't know me. Jose looked toward the land office down the street. My father worked that land for 12 years, built a house, ran cattle. When the revision came, he had to sell half his herd because he couldn't graze them on land he didn't own anymore. His voice was quiet, but hard. He died thinking he'd failed us, died thinking he'd read the papers wrong, made some mistake. He didn't fail, he was robbed. I know that now. Jose turned back to the forge. Time other people knew it too. The next 3 days, Toby worked the forge alongside Jose. The work was hard, heating iron, shaping horseshoes, repairing tools. His shoulders ached and his hands blistered, but it felt honest. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil was a sound that required no translation. On the 4th day, Judge Cole's deputy came to the shop. He was a lean man named Carson, with a badge and the careful eyes of someone used to watching crowds. Judge wants to see you, Carson said. Both of you. They found Cole in his makeshift chambers, documents spread across the table. The law books were open, marked with strips of paper. Got your witnesses lined up? Cole asked. 23, Jose said, including the territorial surveyor from Prescott. He's willing to come down. Cole nodded, satisfied. Good. We'll need his testimony to establish the original survey was legitimate. He pulled out a clean piece of paper, dipped his pen. I'm authorizing a public resurvey for dawn, May 1st. That gives you 2 weeks to prepare. Where? Toby asked. Rio Seco Crossing, where the creek runs through Nolan's land. Public space, good sight lines, plenty of room for witnesses. Cole wrote quickly, his handwriting sharp and precise. I'll need you to prepare a full equipment list. Surveying chain, stakes, compass, tripod, everything regulation. I've got most of it. The court will provide the rest. Cole looked up. This needs to be by the book, Brennan. No shortcuts, no assumptions, every measurement verified, every calculation witnessed. We get one chance at this. Understood. Cole signed the order with a flourish, pressed his seal into warm wax. Carson, I want you to ride out to those boundary stones. Photograph them. I want documentation of those tool marks before anyone tries to hide evidence. Yes, sir. And Jose, Cole continued, spread the word. I want every family that lost land there. I want them to see justice done properly, even if it's 15 years late for some of them. They left the chambers with the signed order. Outside, Toby felt the weight of what was coming. 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks for Wardlow to find out and try to stop it, 2 weeks to prove that the law could work, or confirm Miguel's cynicism forever. You ready for this? Jose asked. Toby thought about the survey chain coiled in his camp, the one that had saved 2 girls from drowning. Thought about Nolan's face when she'd asked if Pedro had been right to believe in American law. Ready as I'll ever be. The rumors started 3 days later. Toby heard them at the saloon first, whispers that stopped when he walked in, then started up again when he turned his back. Pedro Azul hadn't been legally married under U.S. law. The Apache ceremony didn't count for land claims. Nolan was just a squatter with a fake deed. He stood at the bar, nursing a whiskey he couldn't afford, and listened to the lies spread like fire through dry grass. Heard the widow's deed is worthless, someone said behind him. Clerk at the land office checked the records himself. Toby turned slow. Who told you that? The man, a rancher named Hollis, shrugged. Wardlow said he was doing his due diligence before the survey, found problems with the original filing. What kind of problems? Marriage wasn't recognized. Pedro was Mexican, she's Apache. The claim should have been in his name only, but he filed it as community property. Whole thing's irregular. Toby set down his glass hard enough to make heads turn. That's a lie. You calling the land office clerk a liar? I'm calling anyone who believes him a fool. He left before he said something that would make things worse. Outside, the evening air was cool, but his blood was hot. Wardlow wasn't just defending himself, he was going on offense, attacking Nolan's legitimacy before the survey could prove his fraud, smart, vicious, and potentially effective. Judge Cole's chambers smelled of pipe smoke and old paper when Toby arrived. The judge was reading through a stack of documents, his spectacles reflecting the lamplight. Heard the rumors? Cole asked without looking up. Hard to miss. It's a standard tactic. Discredit the plaintiff, make the case about her standing instead of his fraud. Cole set down a document. Question is, can he succeed? We've got Pedro's brand iron. That proves cattle ownership, proves use of the land. But not land ownership if the marriage is questioned. Cole pulled off his spectacles, rubbed the bridge of his nose. Wardlow's arguing that without a recognized marriage, Pedro's claim died with him. The land should have reverted to the territory. That's not how it works. I know how it works, but a jury might not. Cole stood, walked to the window. We need proof that Pedro filed legitimately, that his claim was surveyed properly and accepted by the territorial office. The original surveyor's testimony would settle it. The original surveyor? James McKendrick. He signed off on Pedro's claim in 1871. Where is he? Cole was quiet for a moment. Dead, 3 years ago. Toby felt the ground shift. Then what do we need? The survey notes. McKendrick's original field notes showing the measurements, the boundary markers, everything. Cole turned from the window. Those notes are kept at the land office, in Wardlow's care. He'll never produce them voluntarily. He won't have a choice. The court order requires him to bring all relevant documents to the public survey. Cole smiled thin. If he refuses, that's contempt. If he produces them and they show fraud, he's exposed. Either way, we've got him. It was a trap within a trap. Wardlow could hide the evidence and face jail, or show the evidence and prove his guilt. What if he destroys them? Toby asked. Then we'll know he's guilty, and I'll throw him in jail regardless. Cole relit his pipe, the smell of tobacco filling the room. But I don't think he will. Men like Wardlow believe in the power of official documents. He thinks if the paperwork looks legitimate, he can talk his way out of anything. There was a knock. Carson stuck his head in. "Judge, you've got visitors." Nalene entered first, Miguel behind her. The brother-in-law looked worn from the road, his clothes dusty. His face was tight with something, anger or guilt, Toby couldn't tell which. "Judge Cole," Nayland said formally, "my brother-in-law wishes to speak." Cole gestured to chairs. They sat, the leather creaking. Miguel's boots scraped on the floor, a nervous sound. "I have something to show you," Miguel said. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a folded document. His hands shook slightly as he laid it on the desk. Cole unfolded it, read in silence. His face went hard. "This is a land claim filing," Cole said, "for the parcel adjacent to Nolan's land, dated April 15th of this year." 3 days after I arrived from Sonora," Miguel said quietly. "You filed a claim on land next to your sister-in-law's property?" Cole's voice was cold. "Land that would block her creek access?" Miguel wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I told myself I was protecting the family, that if someone was going to profit from the railroad, it should be us." "So you plan to pressure her to sell cheap," Toby said, understanding flooding through him. "Then buy the adjacent parcel yourself. Control all the water access, resell to the railroad for the easement money." "Yes," Miguel's voice was barely audible. Nalene stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "You came to protect me?" "The railroad would have cheated you anyway." "So you decided to cheat me first?" Her voice was shaking. "You are Pedro's brother, his blood. I wanted the money for our family. I am not your family to sell." Nolan's eyes were bright with tears and fury. "Pedro chose me. We built that land together. Those acres hold his sweat, his dreams for our daughters." She leaned forward. "And you would take it from them?" Miguel had no answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of Cole's pen scratching. "This claim is denied," Cole said flatly. "Fraudulent intent is obvious. You're lucky I don't charge you with conspiracy." He looked at Miguel hard. "Get out of my chambers." Miguel stood, his face gray. At the door he paused, looked back at Nalene. "I am sorry." "Sorry is not enough." Her voice was steady now, cold. "Go back to Sonora. You are not welcome here." He left. The sound of his boots faded down the hall. Nalene sank back into her chair. Toby saw her hands gripping the armrests, knuckles white. "You see now why the resurvey matters?" Cole asked gently. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Cole pulled out a ledger, opened it to a marked page. "I've been gathering information. I now have 23 witnesses committed to attending the survey, including the territorial surveyor from Prescott who will verify McKendrick's original methods." "And the families who lost land?" Toby asked. 12 of them, all ready to testify about their own revisions. Cole wrote a note in the margin. "This isn't just about your land anymore, Mrs. Azul. It's about establishing a precedent, proving that systematic fraud won't be tolerated." Nalin looked at Toby, then at the judge. "Miguel said white law would not work for me. He said I was a fool to trust it." "Your brother-in-law was projecting his own dishonesty onto the system," Cole said. "Yes, the system can be corrupted. Wardlow proved that, but it can also be used to expose corruption, if enough people are willing to stand up." 23 people, Nayland said softly. 23 witnesses who do not even know me. "They know injustice when they see it," Jose's voice came from the doorway. He'd arrived quietly, still in his leather work apron, smelling of coal smoke, and they're tired of watching it happen. Cole stood, gathering papers. "The public resurvey is scheduled for dawn, May 1st. I've issued a court order requiring Wardlow to produce all relevant documents, including the original survey notes." He looked at each of them in turn. "We do this right, by the book, with witnesses. We prove that when enough people demand it, the law can work." Outside, the stars were coming out. Nellen stood on the saloon's porch, looking toward the dark shape of the mountains. "My husband believed in this," she said to Toby. "Believed that if you followed the rules, the law would protect you." She turned to him. "I want to know if he was right." "In 2 weeks, we'll find out." The evening wind carried the smell of sage and distant rain. Somewhere a train whistle sounded, the railroad coming, bringing its $2,000 toward land that might finally be proven to belong to the woman who'd earned it. The night before the survey, Toby couldn't sleep. He lay in his bedroll, staring at stars that seemed too bright, too many, like witnesses to his doubt. What if he was wrong? What if the surveyor from Prescott sided with Wardlow? What if the boundary stones had moved naturally, and he was seeing conspiracy where there was only weather and time? Worse, what if Nayland lost everything because he'd pushed her to fight? He thought about his army days, all those families he'd displaced with his surveys, lines drawn on maps that became borders they couldn't cross. He'd told himself he was following orders, doing his job, and every one of those families had suffered for it. Maybe he was making the same mistake again, just on the other side. Shouting pulled him from his thoughts. It came from Nayland's camp a quarter-mile north. Miguel's voice raised in anger. Toby pulled on his boots and went. He arrived to find Miguel on horseback, Nayland standing by her fire, with her arms crossed. The girls watched from the shelter, eyes wide. "Last chance," Miguel was saying in Spanish, then switching to English when he saw Toby. "Leave tonight. I will give you $300, more than the land is worth." "It is not about money," Nayland said. "It is always about money." Miguel's horse stamped, nervous. "You will lose tomorrow. They will say Pedro's claim was never legal. They will take the land, and you will have nothing." What if Miguel is right? Nayland looked at Toby, and he saw the doubt there. "What if we lose?" Toby's throat was tight. "I believe we'll tell the truth. What happens after is up to the law. And if the law fails, then we'll know we tried." Miguel leaned forward in his saddle. "Trying is not enough when you have daughters to feed. The railroad is coming, $2,000 if the deed is clear, but the railroad will not pay an Apache widow. They will find a way around you." "That's her $2,000. It's a dream," Miguel interrupted. "This is survival." Aida stepped out from the shelter, small, 9 years old, but her voice was clear. "Papa said this land would care for us." Everyone went quiet. Kaya followed her sister. "Papa told me the creek sings. He said we should listen to it." Nayland looked at her daughters, then at the land Pedro had claimed, the land he'd believed in enough to file properly, to pay all the fees, to trust that American law would protect his family. "Pedro wanted you to grow up here," Nayland said softly. She looked at Miguel. "I will not dishonor his dream because I am afraid." Miguel's face hardened. "You are a fool." "Perhaps, but I am a fool who stands in daylight." He turned his horse and rode into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats faded until there was only the night wind and the distant murmur of the creek. Nayland sat by the fire. Toby saw her shoulders shake once, then still. The girls came and sat beside her, one on each side. "Tomorrow," Toby said, "we measure the truth." He went to his horse, brought back the surveying chain. The iron links gleamed in the firelight as he uncoiled them on the ground. 66 feet, 100 links, the same chain that had saved these girls from drowning. "This is how we prove it," he said to Aida and Kaya. "Every link is exactly the same length. You can't lie with a chain. It measures what it measures." Aida touched one of the links. "Cold. Metal holds the truth," Toby said. "Doesn't bend for money or fear or what people want to be true. It just is." Kaya counted the links under her breath, her lips moving. Smart girl, learning the rhythm of measurement. "Tomorrow at dawn, we'll stretch this chain across the land," Toby continued. "We'll measure from the section corner to where the boundary should be. Everyone will see." "And then Mama keeps the land?" Aida asked. "Then everyone knows the truth, and the judge decides what happens next." Nayland was watching him teach her daughters. Something in her face had shifted, not hope exactly, but determination. "Kind man," Kaya said. She'd given him that name after he saved them. "Will they believe the chain?" "They'll have to. 23 people will watch me measure. They can't all be wrong." The pre-dawn darkness was absolute when they gathered at Rio Seco. Toby arrived first, his survey equipment loaded on the pack horse, the tripod, the compass, the stakes, and the chain, coiled and ready. Jose came next, carrying a lantern. Then the others, one by one, two by two, retired surveyors with their own chains for verification, ranchers who'd lost land, Mexican families, Apache families, Anglo families who'd watched the theft happen and done nothing. By the time the eastern sky started to gray, 23 witnesses stood in a loose circle around the boundary stone. Judge Cole arrived in a wagon with Carson driving. The old man climbed down carefully, carrying his law books wrapped in oilcloth. He set them on the boundary stone itself, the law grounded in earth. "We are here," Cole said, his voice carrying in the still air, to determine the truth of a land claim. Mrs. Nalin Azul claims ownership of 160 acres. The Territorial Land Office records show 120. We will measure which is correct. Silas Wardlow arrived last, riding a nervous horse, carrying a leather document case. His face was pale in the growing light. He saw the crowd, and his hands tightened on the reins. "Mr. Wardlow," Cole said, "do you have the documents I requested?" "Judge, I must protest." "Do you have them?" Wardlow dismounted, fumbled with the case. "The official plat is on file. This survey is irregular." "The official plat is what we're questioning." Cole held out his hand. "The original survey notes. Now." The sun crested the mesa, pouring golden light across the desert. It caught the survey chain as Toby laid it out, link by link, gleaming like a promise. Nayland stood with her daughters, dressed in her finest, watching as 23 witnesses formed a circle of justice around her land. And Silas Wardlow, hands shaking, opened his document case to reveal the truth he'd been hiding. Wardlow pulled out a leather-bound journal, James McKendrick's original survey notes from 1871. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded but legible. Cole took it carefully, opened it to the marked page. "Pedro Azul claim," Cole read aloud. "Northeast quarter, section 14, measured and confirmed, 160 acres. Boundary markers set April 12, 1871. Signed, James McKendrick, Territorial Surveyor." He looked up at Wardlow. "And when was this revised?" "March 1874. Wardlow's voice was thin. "After the landowner's death. Standard revision protocol? There is no such protocol." Cole closed the journal. "Let's see what the chain tells us." Toby and the retired surveyor, a man named Hoffman with 40 years' experience, positioned themselves at the section corner. The original survey marker, a stone cairn built by McKendrick himself. "We'll measure north," Toby said. "According to the deed, the north boundary should be at 40 chains. That's 2,640 feet." He lifted one end of the chain. The metal was cold in his hands, heavy with purpose. The same chain that had pulled 2 girls from floodwater now stretched out to pull truth from the ground. "Mark!" Hoffman called. Toby drove a stake. The sound of the mallet echoed across the desert. Clink, clink, clink. They moved forward, 66 feet at a time. The chain stretched between them, straight and true. The witnesses followed, a silent procession across the sage-covered ground. 1 chain, 2, 5, 10. The rhythm of it was almost ceremonial. Stretch the chain, call the mark, drive the stake, move forward. The sun climbed higher, warming the metal links until they gleamed like gold. Toby could smell the sage crushing under boots, the dust rising, the clean scent of morning air. His hands remembered this work, the weight of the chain, the way the links settled, the certainty of measurement. 20 chains, 30. They reached 40 chains and stopped. This was where the north boundary should be according to the deed. Toby looked around. Empty ground, no markers, just open desert. "No stones here," Hoffman said loudly for the witnesses. "According to Mrs. Azul's deed, the boundary should be at this point." "Keep measuring," Cole directed. They walked south, not measuring now, just walking, counting their paces. The crowd followed. 6 more chains, nearly 1,600 feet, and there they were, the boundary stones set in a neat line with fresh survey stakes beside them. Toby knelt by the nearest stone. The smell of disturbed earth was still faint around its base. He dug down with his knife, exposing the sides. "Fresh chisel marks," he called out. "Tool marks on 3 sides. This stone was moved recently, within the last year." Hoffman examined it, ran his weathered fingers over the marks. "Agreed. These marks are new. Original stones would be weathered smooth." Jose stepped forward with a measuring tape. "Distance from the original boundary to these stones?" They measured. The tape stretched taut, the numbers clicking past. "Exactly 40 chains," Toby said. 2,640 feet, 40 acres. The math was simple, undeniable. The crowd murmured, some angry, some vindicated. 12 families who'd lost land the same way saw their suspicions confirmed. Cole opened McKendrick's survey journal again. Original notes show north boundary at 40 chains from section corner. "Mr. Wardlow, would you explain why the current boundary markers are 40 chains south of where they should be?" Wardlow's face had gone gray. The original survey was in error. James McKendrick was the chief territorial surveyor for 15 years, Cole said. "Are you suggesting he couldn't count to 40? No answer. Hoffman measured the east-west boundaries. They matched the deed perfectly. 160 acres total, with 40 stolen from the north end. The deed is accurate, Hoffman announced to the crowd. The plat is fraudulent. Jose produced Pedro's brand iron, the one Cole had given Toby from the estate records. I have bills of sale here. Pedro Azul sold cattle from this land in 1871, 72, and 73. This brand was registered with the Territorial Livestock Board. He held up the iron so everyone could see. He used the full 160 acres for grazing. That's documented. The territorial surveyor from Prescott stepped forward. He was an official presence, his word carrying weight beyond the local community. I've reviewed McKendrick's original survey methods, he said. Everything was done properly, by the book. The 1871 survey of Pedro Azul's claim is legitimate and should stand. Cole looked at Wardlow. How many other claims did you alter? I want a lawyer. You'll get one. Cole pulled out a separate ledger, the one he'd been compiling. But first, answer the question, how many? Wardlow stayed silent, but Jose had the answer. I found receipts, Jose said, stepping forward with papers. Speculators buying excess acreage from the territorial office. Prices between $2 and $3 per acre. 47 transactions, all signed by Silas Wardlow. Your commission? Cole asked Wardlow. No answer, but Jose provided that too. $50 per transaction. Total of $2,350 in fees. The crowd's murmur turned angry. 47 families. Years of systematic theft. Mr. Wardlow, Cole said formally, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. Wardlow's eyes went wild. He turned and ran for his horse. The crowd moved as one, blocking his path. 23 witnesses standing firm, Jose in front, his blacksmith arms crossed, the retired surveyors, the ranchers, the families who'd lost land. You stole from my father, Jose said quietly. Other voices joined. From my brother. From my family. From my children. Wardlow backed against the stone wall of the old line shack, trapped. His breathing was ragged, panicked. Carson stepped forward with handcuffs. The click of metal on Wardlow's wrists seemed loud in the morning air. Cole stood, his law book still resting on the boundary stone. All altered surveys by Silas Wardlow are hereby voided. Original deeds are reinstated. He looked at Nolan. Mrs. Azul, your deed is confirmed. 160 acres. Additionally, the railroad has filed notice of easement through Section 14. Payment of $2,000 will be delivered to you within 30 days. Nolan's knees buckled. Her daughters caught her, all three of them crying and laughing at once. The crowd cheered. 47 families seeing justice after years of being told to accept the theft, to move on, to forget. Toby coiled his chain slowly, the metal warm now from the sun. He felt Nalen's presence beside him before she spoke. You lost everything for this, she said. Not everything. He looked at her, at her daughters, at the land stretching north with its singing creek. Found out the law can work when good people force it to. What will you do now? He smiled. Reckon I still need water rights for cattle, if I can find work again. I have creek access, Nalen said carefully. Perhaps we could share? Fair terms. You help maintain the fences, the access road. You get water for your herd. Toby held out his hand. That's a square deal. She took it, not a handshake of obligation or debt, a partnership between equals who'd fought for what was right and won. A week later, Judge Cole convened formal court in Tucson. The courthouse was packed, 47 families filling every bench, spilling into the aisles. Toby stood near the back with Jose, watching justice grind forward with the slow patience of territorial law. Cole presided from behind a scarred oak desk, the same law books that had rested on the boundary stone now stacked before him. In the matter of fraudulent land surveys, Cole read, his voice carrying through the room, the court finds that Silas Wardlow, clerk of the Tucson Territorial Land Office, did willfully and systematically alter official survey records to defraud 47 landholders of their rightful property. He looked up, met the eyes of the families. All revised surveys bearing Wardlow's signature are hereby voided. Original deeds are reinstated in full. The sound that went through the room was like a long-held breath finally released. Some families wept, others sat in stunned silence, holding deeds they'd thought were worthless. Speculators who purchased stolen acreage are ordered to return said land immediately, Cole continued. Those who sold to third parties will pay fair market value as restitution. One by one, Cole called the families forward. Each received a corrected deed, stamped and sealed. Jose's family got their 80 acres back, the land his father had worked until the day he died, thinking he'd failed them. When Nalan's turn came, she walked to the bench with Aita and Kaya beside her. Cole handed her the deed himself, his old hands steady. 160 acres, confirmed and restored, he said, then added quietly, "Your husband was right to believe in the law, Mrs. Azul. Sometimes it just takes longer than it should." Nalan's voice was thick. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the man who risked everything to prove the truth." Cole nodded toward Toby. After the proceedings, a railroad representative approached Nalan on the courthouse steps. He was a thin man in a suit too heavy for Arizona heat, carrying a leather satchel. "Mrs. Azul, I'm authorized to deliver payment for the Section 14 easement." He counted out $2,000 in territorial notes, each one crisp and new. "The railroad appreciates your cooperation." Nalene stared at the money like it might vanish. More money than she'd ever held, more than most people saw in 5 years of hard work. "This will pay for my daughter's schooling," she said softly, "and for the land improvements, and for living while you build something lasting," Toby finished. That evening, the community gathered in the square. Someone had brought fiddles, someone else brought food, tamales and biscuits and stews that mixed flavors from 3 cultures: Anglo families, Mexican families, Apache families, sharing tables and stories. Toby watched Nalan teach a group of townswomen how to make Apache bread, her hands showing the rhythm of kneading. Aita and Kaya played with town children, the language barrier melting in the universal grammar of games. Jose found him with 2 cups of something that smelled like homebrew whiskey. "To justice," Jose said, raising his cup. "To people willing to stand up for it," Toby countered. They drank. The whiskey burned, but it felt honest. 6 months later, autumn turned the cottonwoods gold along Rio Seco. Toby was mending fence on the shared boundary when he heard the girls' voices, Spanish and English mixed together, calling to each other across the creek. His cattle operation was small, but steady. The water-sharing arrangement with Nalan worked better than he'd hoped. She'd used some of the railroad money to build a proper barn, improve the fence, dig an irrigation ditch. He maintained the access roads and helped with the heavy work. It wasn't charity on either side, just 2 people who'd fought for what was right and found they worked well together. The girls came running across the bridge, not just Aida and Kaya anymore, but 3 town children with them. They were heading to school, books wrapped in cloth, lunch pails swinging. "Morning, Mr. Brennan," Kaya called. Her English was nearly perfect now, with only the slightest accent. "Morning, you finished that arithmetic?" "All of it," she grinned. "Miss Edwards says I might be ready for surveying lessons soon." Toby felt something warm in his chest. Teaching the next generation to measure truth, that was legacy. Nalene appeared on her porch, waving. "Toby, coffee?" He secured the fence post and walked to her place. The house Pedro had started was finished now. New roof, glass windows, a porch where you could sit and watch the sunset. They drank coffee, in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from working together through seasons. "The railroad finished laying track last week," Nalan said. "Through our land." "Our land," Toby corrected gently. "Your land." "Partnership land," she smiled. The conductor stopped to thank me, said he'd heard the story of the survey. He called it the chain that measured truth. Toby thought about his old Army surveying days, the lines he'd drawn that moved people from their homes. Those lines were still there, those wounds still real. But here, on this one section of Arizona territory, he'd drawn a different kind of line, one that gave land back instead of taking it away. Down the road, Jose's blacksmith hammer rang out in steady rhythm, the sound of honest work, honest living. 47 families working land that was rightfully theirs. In the Tucson courthouse, behind glass, the surveying chain was mounted on the wall. The plaque beneath it read, "Truth measured here, 1876. But the real truth, Toby thought, was simpler. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, if you stand in daylight with witnesses and measure carefully, the law works the way it was meant to. And when the railroad finally laid track through Section 14, it passed through land that belonged to the woman who'd earned it, not the men who'd tried to steal it. Now, I reckon some folks might wonder if one man risking his livelihood for a widow's land claim really changed anything in the grand scheme. But I'll tell you what I know. 47 families got their land back. Not because the law suddenly became perfect, but because One man remembered what he'd seen wrong and decided not to look away. And a woman who'd been told the system would never work for her decided to stand in the sun and let the truth be measured. You see, that's the thing about truth. It's got weight and distance. You can measure it with a 66-foot chain, link by link. You can't hide it when everyone's watching. Toby Brennan didn't become rich from that cattle partnership. It gave him enough to live on, nothing more. But I heard him say once, years later, that he could look at himself in the mirror again. And for a man who'd drawn lines that moved people in his army days, that was worth more than all the gold in California. As for Nalin, she raised those daughters on land that was rightfully theirs. When the railroad came through, she stood there as an equal, negotiating terms like any other landowner, because that's what she was. The survey chain's still in the courthouse, in Tucson, behind glass. School children see it on field trips. The plaque says, "Was so truth measured here, 1876? But I think the real truth's in what happened after. 47 families who learned that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, if you stand in daylight with witnesses and measure carefully, the law can work the way it was meant to. That's a lesson worth passing down. And the creek on Section 14 still sings, just like Pedro told his daughter it would. Some things don't change. Some things shouldn't.